Uh, I am fortunate to introduce the eminent philatelist from United States of America, Mr. James Peter Gough, RDP FRPSL. Mr. Gough has accumulated many philatelic awards in his exhibiting experience over the last 58 years. Mr. Gough first exhibited in 1966 at a local stamp show in Annapolis, Maryland. His first international exhibit experience was at Stockholm in 1974. His philatelic achievements include in 2012, he signed the role of Distinguished Philatelist (RDP), elected to the American Hall of Fame Plus Award in 2020. He has won American National Junior Championship in 1973 and won two times Champion of Champions Grand Prix National in 1993 and 2013. He has won four international Grand Prix awards. In 1999, FIP Grand Prix d'Honneur at Paris, 2008 FIAP Grand Prix of the Americas at Los Angeles, 2015 FEPA Grand Prix d'Honneur at London, 2016 FIP Grand Prix International Candidate at New York, and 2022 FIP World Stamp Champion at London. Mr. Gough has a unique distinction of winning gold, large gold in three different FIP classes with the same exhibit. His he is a prolific writer and speaker on philatelic matters, winning the RPSL Crawford Medal of Best Book in year 2020, the Postal History of the Universal Postal Union, the Postal Card Worldwide, 1869-1974, as well as winning Best in Class in Literature at London 2022. I request Mr. Gough to start his presentation. Over to you, sir.
I want to thank all of you for inviting me to speak once again to my fellow philatelists in India. I'm talking to you from California. It's about 5:30 in the morning. I had to get up over an hour ago, but I'm glad to be here. I'm going to be talking on exhibiting postal history, which has been my main theme really since the 1970s. And in the early days of postal history, it was not well regarded by a lot of the leadership in philately because the feeling was that postal history was primarily pre-stamp and that it wasn't very expensive. So all the awards kept going to traditional collectors with their set of rules. And postal history was finally recognized and created as its own class. And so what's happened over time is postal history has really expanded to include material that has stamps on it, and it's price competitive with most traditional collections. So that's brought a prestige into this field. You've seen my my historical resume is presented here so that people have an understanding from the viewpoint that I speak from. I also am an American judge. I'm a chief judge in the United States, and I'm also a FIP judge. I start this presentation with a fundamental question. Why do you want to exhibit? Some people want to share their personal collection, have absolutely no dream of winning their nation's Grand Prix, or especially the international Grand Prix. So they just want to share, and that's okay. Play with your collection as you want to, present it as you want to, and I think you're fine. Others want to educate about their research and what's going on. And then there are others who are really oriented towards winning large golds and other prizes. What it takes to win large gold, what most people think is that it takes money, it takes luck, and the right kind of topic. But I think you'll find that in the last decade, this or two, that this has shifted quite a bit. But I do have a health warning, and the health warning is that exhibiting can be dangerous to your health. You need to keep and maintain a proper perspective. So if you don't get the medal level you thought you should have, this invites you to do more research into why, as opposed to feeling rejected or upset that you didn't get it. Juries are composed of human beings, so they have different tastes and preferences. Humans have been known occasionally to even have prejudices. And, the score sheets give people the impression that this subjective subject is very impartial and very objective. But this idea of giving mathematical ratings to what is a subjective evaluation is misleading. And unfortunately, in much of our societies around the globe today, this is a standard problem that we all have, where we're trying to give a perspective that everything's objective when it really is subjective. So keep that in mind as you exhibit. One of the things you've also got to be aware of is that philately is first and foremost a social activity, and we probably don't talk enough about this element of importance when we are discussing techniques and other issues about exhibiting. So exhibiting is really a social medium. It's a means in which we share to bond. It's a commonality of interest. It's intrigued by thought. I've actually met and have become really good friends with people who after they saw my exhibit came up to me and we got engaged in conversation. Other times I've stood near my exhibit at internationals and national shows just for in case anybody wants to talk to me. But exhibiting is really the show and tell for adults, and we need to keep that in perspective. Oops. Let's see. Exhibiting is how I organize my collection. Philately is the poor man's art collection. We actually learn more about our material as we work with it and try to explain it and exhibit it. And it's how we connect with other people around the globe. Subtleties of exhibiting include demonstrating your sophistication, your knowledge, perseverance. It's a pride of effort and ownership, but it's also, depending upon your storyline, which is officially called treatment, it's how you are able to explain how you put your collection together. And in postal history, this is particularly important because unlike exhibiting traditional, if your collection's primarily a stamp collection, it's kind of obvious from catalogs what they are and their sequence. But in postal history, this is not always obvious. Also, bear in mind that in exhibiting, it's no different from any other competitive endeavor in life. Exhibiting is first and foremost an individual endeavor on the part of the exhibitor. There are many champions with many ways. It's about your personal vision in creating your exhibit. It's about your passion and your obsession with getting the exhibit into the form you want it, along with the material that's in it. And it's about listening to input. I have had my greatest advances when I have had rather unflattering input from other people, because when people are giving you their perspective, they're not always very diplomatic. They can't always explain what they're trying to explain to you, but you need to think seriously about the inputs, particularly if many of them seem to be hitting on the same thing. All successful exhibits need visual beauty. In postal history, we tend to emphasize a lot more the research, the knowledge, and that kind of thing, and our treatment will often lead us there. But you need to realize that if you're in this really for the competitiveness, there needs to be a lot of visual beauty in your material. That's why it's very hard for pre-stamped material to win the very high awards, because often it's not very pretty. Although I have to say that a winner of a Grand Prix at Finland in '95 from France showed the most amazing collection of pre-stamped material from the Napoleonic era, and every item in there was beautiful. It was the strikes were beautiful. There was color. There were a lot of other things that uh, really made this an outstanding collection. But it's really hard when you're collecting pre-stamp and you're focused on the rates, the roots, the hand stamps, and many of the hand stamps are black and not well struck. And one of the detractions for having a pretty exhibit is if you have to replicate many of the postal markings found on your cover. That should not be a standard. You want to find material that is self-explanatory and doesn't need to be replicated in some sort of enhanced photocopy. Variety is also a big help. You need to show variety of material, if at all possible, on your subject. And, you know, your exhibit will demonstrate depth and philatelic importance by beauty and variety, what Chris Harmon in the United Kingdom calls visual interest or texture. You know, if it has a lot of texture, it tends to attract viewers and as well as judges. If winning higher medals is your objective, then you want it to be attractive, not just for the general public, but also the judges. The attributes of success are wow power. I call it eye candy, you know, stuff that sometimes people will just stop and try to appreciate, like they might do the Mona Lisa at the museum in Paris. So having pieces that speak to gravitas and are of themselves important and pretty are by definition philatelically important. The intellectual wonderment is good, but it really starts with the visual. Variety should include visually obvious stuff. Color, again, variety material helps if you can do this within your postal history definition. And postal history is quite broad. If the material supports your storyline and your treatment, as I'll show you on some of my exhibit pages, you can even include postage stamps and proofs in a postal history exhibit, but it has to be relevant and it has to support your storyline. I've already gone through a lot of this stuff, the depth of your exhibit and how you're able to show it in the selection of your material. You don't want to show material that's so that needs a lot of uncommon language to explain. And one of the things a lot of collectors fail to realize is that exhibits need to be comprehensive as opposed to complete. And this is an issue more for traditional than postal history, but even in a postal history field, there are people that try to be complete in the subject, say, of a hand stamp or a root or something else, and they overwhelm the exhibit with too much detail, and that actually will pull the viewer and the judge away from looking at the exhibit as a whole. If you have depth, you have credibility as a master of your field, and your ability to communicate a balance of story and study. Philatelic importance, if you have to argue this one, it's an obvious no. However, treatment does affect the perception of importance. Treatment and importance go hand in hand. If you pick a topic that in and of itself is deemed important, that helps you as long as the material backs up that storyline. Some topics just cannot carry this argument. Yeah, I was reminiscing with one of the other speakers the other day, and we reminisced about a guy who was showing a one-frame exhibit of the artistic proofs of post-World War II France. And, the proofs were all pretty, and he chose a specific French colony, and he was very frustrated because he didn't get a very high rarity rating. And he said, look, there are only 3 to 5 of each of these that were ever made, and I have a whole single frame of this stuff. And I had to point out that in a recent trip to go to the French National Exhibition, I walked around the floor and I literally saw thousands of similar items. And so I told him his problem isn't that his individual items aren't rare, it's just that thousands of those. I'm getting feedback. Are the rest of you hearing feedback? Okay. So the problem there was when you multiply the numbers of stamps times 5, you came up with almost something like 12,000 opportunities. And then you ended up with the ability to create possibly a 10, 20, 30 frame exhibit if you had the checkbook to be able to buy it right there and then at this single exhibition. So by definition, the stuff was not rare. Individual pieces might be rare, but there's so much of it around that, he had a challenge trying to convince the jury of rarity. He still got a decent award. It was a pretty enough exhibit, but there was not enough of the stuff that people would have looked at and gone, wow. Price does not guarantee importance. I've seen some exhibits that were multi-million-dollar exhibits and they couldn't understand why they didn't win Grand Prix. Because they're looking at the collection that won Grand Prix and it was only worth, somewhere maybe upwards of $100,000. And so when you're sitting on a $20 million exhibit, you think that the decision was somehow fixed. But that's not the case. Money alone isn't going to do it. And when you see a philatelically important collection, I paraphrase a former member of the U.S. Supreme Court when he was talking about pornography, and he said, I may not be able to define it in legal terminology, but I sure know it when I see it. Also, descriptions can support or contradict claims of importance. There was one collection I saw at an international where, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't want to embarrass any exhibitors, but one of the descriptions went something like this. The only triple rate cover known with a combination of 5 different values posted in Christiania to Timbuktu on February 29th. And when you read the description, wow, does somebody have their cell phone on in the room with their computer? Is the cell phone broadcasting?
Yeah, James, we just removed that one person whose microphone kept turning on every so often. So
Okay. Sorry about that. But that happens if people are listening on their phone and they're in front of their computer, the computer will pick up and rebroadcast what it's hearing from the phone. So anyways, as a judge, I was looking at this and I couldn't figure out if the guy was claiming that the triple rate was rare or the combination of 5 values or the destination of Timbuktu or that it was on a leap year. And it just drove all of us crazy because he consistently did this with everything in his collection, and he was very upset when he didn't get the award he was looking for. Texture. There are many ways to demonstrate this. One is the nature of the material feels important, not just because it's old, but because of its use, its root. There are a number of different factors that make it feel important. Recently, I was looking at a cover from India to Russia in 1876 after India had joined the General Postal Union. I mean, I had never seen another one like it. So Was it spectacularly beautiful? No, it was pretty. But the fact is that it felt really important to me because of the rate and the time period. Storyline helps with texture because if you have an ease of flow in your headings, viewers and judges can follow your thinking easily. You have philatelic importance of some items that just on their face are important, and I'll show you some of those. You have color, presentation, and layout, and a variety of material. Informational value to viewers. If a viewer can walk away from your exhibit and they feel that they've just learned something, you're doing exceedingly well. You want viewers to come away knowing something that most philatelists don't know, of course, providing it's true. I've seen some inventions, but I find that there are many exhibits, not just a few, but many, where I learn new things because the exhibitor has highlighted something that almost everybody else has missed. And how you organize your page will help viewers find that kind of information. Treatment defines importance and vice versa. Now, let's get into a few examples here. This is my exhibit page. This is the exhibit that won the World Stamp Championship in London in 2022. And so I lay out the chapters so people will know what the general organization is. And like with most things in philately, except thematic and general philately and some others, much of philately is chronological, and so I show the dates that these Congress rules or changes became effective, and then I give some background. And then I also give an experience, I give terminology, and I define what it is and what they'll find inside the exhibit so that people just don't make assumptions. Before the General Postal Union was created, they had problems with individual pieces of mail being reweighed at every transit point and being re-rated. And I showed this item as one of those. But notice here in the headings, inefficiencies of mail transit, each country assessed postage and weight. And with this, you can pretty much figure out the whole page. And then I highlight what's important about the page here. And this is the most impressive example of weight rates changing as the cover went from transit point to transit point that I've ever seen. I want to show double domestic rate. The theory developed among British North America and the United States was if the post office made what money it needed to make on the outbound route to the border, along with what it would normally collect on the inbound route from the border, that when you add them together, they tend to be double the domestic rate. And so that became a key theory, not just in this step with North America, but it also became key in establishing the UPU. What I did here, technically speaking, is I did a large scan. I printed out a scan enlarged significantly. This is what the stamp looks like in real life. If this were on the page by itself, regardless of what the heading says, people would tend to walk by it and not notice the fact that these are two halves of two separate stamps put together for the single rate. Now, this was not required, and this is not a postal fraud because here I show the stamp used legitimately as a bisect, but here you have the two bisects put together, and what happens is that when the jury, which has, literally only a few minutes for every exhibit, when the jury sees that, they understand the concept immediately and the rarity of the item. Here I have prepayment is not always possible, and I explain the fact that France retaliated against Spain for the mandatory tipping of letter carriers, and they started charging mail from Spain. And then down below, in the Ottoman Empire, it wasn't always possible to prepay a rate. And so this is supposedly the largest postage due use of 10 kurush of the Tugra first issue postage dues of Turkey. Mixed franking, I explain how this came about. So in this one up here, you have mixed franking within the Russian Empire. So it was prepaid, but insufficiently in what would today be Ukraine. And then when it got to the main postal center in Constantinople, it didn't have the right prepayment for the mail to go out to one of the outlying areas. And so it was held for postage. A notice was sent to the addressee, send us 5 kopecks so we can send you the letter. Over here in Australia, certain parts of New South Wales were much farther from Sydney than to Melbourne. So if you really wanted a letter to go fast, you would prepay the mandatory rate from New South Wales to Victoria, and then you would put on stamps from Victoria.
बंदी हो गया था आपका हेडफोन हेडफोन
I'm sorry. Okay. So this is an example of a mixed use among British colonies. And then in this one, it started in a Spanish colony, but it was carried by British packet, and then it went through France and then into Spain. And for a de minimis amount of postage paid in Puerto Rico, it would not be charged again in Spain. But think about it. You end up having to transmit your mail outside of your postal system through 2 other countries for it to get back to your mother country. So that's also a form of mixed franking. Here's an item where I had to do a copy of the folded out wrapper. This wrapper carried commercial papers. It was illegal for anyone other than the post office to carry mail. And so they ended up using a full sheet of an imperforate classical stamp. And this is thought to be the only full sheet of a classical imperforate stamp still on the cover. And so what I did here was I did a reduced scan of both sides put together so people might comprehend that this is not just a large block on a piece of paper, but that it's the back of the wrapper. Here are some usages of early usages for postage due. France was the first country in the world to to issue a wrapper or a label specifically for postage due purposes. And these others are usages of, down here in the lower left is the Bavarian first postage due. This is the outer sheet in Papal States where we have a high charge for postage due using regular stamps. Up here, we have the only known use of a postage stamp to pay postage due on an incoming letter to Prince Edward Island. And down here in the lower right-hand corner, we have our early classical shield stamps of Sweden being used to collect postage due as well. And whether you prepaid or you paid on delivery, the rate was the same in many of these cases. Here we have reply paid postal cards. The upper right one was a pre-addressed card issued in the United States for domestic use, but somehow it got included in material sent to someone in Canada. The US and Canada had recently agreed to exchange mail at a 2-cent rate, postal card that is. And so the Canadian thought if he only added a 1-cent Canadian stamp it would provide for the 2-cent rate, but that was not the case. It was marked as 10 cents postage due because not being properly prepaid in Canada, it'd be treated as an unpaid letter in the United States, except it appears that the American Post Office did not collect the postage due, which often happened on mail coming in from Canada. Down below, we have examples of reply cards or response cards from different states in Germany. So here we have, I need to get my glasses back on. So here we have Bavarian, the green one is Bavarian, the pink one is Germany, being used back from Austria, and at this time it was illegal for that use. But because the cards had just recently been issued, the instructions in German below were followed by the Austrian postal clerk, not knowing that these were not to be honored in Austria. They were in a postal union at the time. So he assumed if these were the instructions in Germany, then he would follow them in Austria. Shortly after the use of this response card on the 19th of July, 1872, the Austrian and Hungarian post offices notified their postal clerks to no longer honor these German cards. Here's an example where I use stamps and proofs. When the General Postal Union was started on July 1st, 1875, I have a first day use here. We're not sure how many first day usages might exist, but I've been told by a number of people that this is one of only 3 that exists. This stamp and its value was issued on July 1st for the new General Postal Union rate. And so the stamp becomes an important part of the story. And that's why I get away with showing a proof. And from the die, I end up showing a black plate proof, which are really quite rare. And I show an imprimatur overprinted specimen. And I include the others for visual interest. If you're walking down the aisle of the exhibits, this would probably catch your eye. Here's an example where I'm showing the different rates, because at this point in the General Postal Union, countries could choose different rates within a range. And so I want to show the rate equal to the upper limit. But in doing so, I'm using the only known wrapper with this particular overprint, and that the overprint is also inverted. And so I enlarge the stamp to catch the viewer's eye. I don't do this a lot. I only do this in instances where when you're looking at it, you go, would anybody even notice? You know, if you're a specialist in the Philippines, you might notice, but if you're not a specialist in the Philippines, that'd probably slip you'd slip right by it. And my exhibit covers the world, and so I have to be sensitive to the idea that most of the viewers and most of the judges won't know much about everything in my exhibit. So I have to really explain stuff. And I know many of us have been criticized over the years for writing, but if you have a system of headings, and the headings make it easy for people to understand the page, you can do a general explanation. You know, I put the general explanation at the top. The specific explanations are usually in paragraphs near the items, and that seems to work well. We had restricted postal unions. So in the bottom left, we have Portuguese India to British India when they got into a reciprocal arrangement on domestic rates. Here we have Serbia and Austria, and this is the 3rd day, not just of the General Postal Union, but the 3rd day of the special restricted union between Serbia and Austria for their rates. And then the bottom right is in Gibraltar when Spain and Portugal admitted Gibraltar to the Iberian Postal Union, a restricted union within the UPU. And so if you were in Gibraltar, you could send mail to Spain or to Portugal at the domestic rate. Here's where I show a high value on a tag that went with a letter. This tag shows the only known 1 pound brown lilac with the orb watermark known used on anything. It's a very rare watermark. It was done by mistake in the last month of issue when they needed some more 1 pound values. And so down below here, I have the a reduced scan of the address side, and it's signed by the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Lord Salisbury. And then this was a tag, the only one I've ever seen where in the Foreign Office or the Colonial Office, when they were sending mail out, there was a rule in the UPU that all mail, including official mail, unless on postal business, had to bear postage stamps. And so they would separate mail in stacks. Mail going to non-UPU member colonies didn't need stamps, but mail going to colonies that were in the UPU did need stamps. And that label would be put on one of the stacks. These are examples of admission of the French colonies to the General Postal Union. The cover in the upper right is the earliest known use that mail left the colony when it had joined the General Postal Union. And then down below, I show an unusual cover that was properly franked for posting in the colony, which colony we don't know, using the Colonial General Issue at that rate. But it was carried by a person to France and posted there, and the stamps were accepted. And the interesting thing about this is that stamps of the French colonies could be used in France, but the stamps of France could not be used in the colonies. Even though they look alike, the difference was perforated versus imperf. And that's why I have the scan here showing enlarged both stamps so you can see that they're the imperforate varieties. Here we have the Philippines and a number of other Spanish-speaking colonies misunderstood the UPU rule about putting the name on postal cards, and they started putting them on stamps. And so here we have the issued stamp, which we have an example here, and these are very difficult. Here we have the postal card, but then I have a proof of the card that was distributed later to the UPU. And I did a cutout here. So the card actually is underneath the exhibit page. So I didn't want to take up too much space and crowd the material on the top of the page. I'm including some of these other examples because exhibiting is not just about the material and the treatment, it's also about how we present material, and we don't want pages that are utterly crowded. Here we have postage due. I talk about the methodology. This is the largest multiple on cover of the first design type postage dues of the United States, and it's on a cover from Haiti. Over here on the left, we have a drop letter rate in Guadeloupe with the 15 centime blue. There was a leading expert of France, and he said he had never seen this value on a cover because it was specifically created for the drop letter. And I ended up finding two that he never knew about over his 60 years of collecting. So I got one. Notice how I overlap material. Nobody's going to read all this stuff here, but I want to show that this is part of the bulletin that was sent out by the UPU. And here I do a scan of this item opened up. If I open this up, it would take over the entire page and would not serve a benefit, but I can do a reduced image to show what is what it would look like. Here I get into stamps again. These stamps were specifically issued to meet General Postal Union at this point, Universal Postal Union requirements. And by the way, I haven't explained this to you yet, but the General Postal Union and the Universal Postal Union are the same organization. They just changed names, the name of the organization at the Congress of Paris in 1878, effective April 1st, 1879. So the UPU would send out postal inspectors that they borrowed from Switzerland to make sure new members were ready and that they had adequate and appropriate stamp supplies. And one of the regulatory interpretations of proper supplies included having the proper rates that would be common to the mail that they were using. And so this shows Granada, and this is one of only 2 uses of the halfpenny being used on anything, and this is to properly uprate the postal card for the overseas rate of 1 1/2 penny. But I show these are this is an imprimatur, and then this is a block and a strip of the 3 values comprising the series. And then down below, I show St. Vincent, where they overprinted stamps quickly to meet the postal inspector's demands for having the proper rates. These on cover are exceptionally rare, and there's only 1 cover known with any of these values on it. And the guy is being really unreasonable. He is not willing to sell me the cover yet. I'm being funny. A lot of people don't realize that corrugated cardboard did not come into active use in the world until about the 1950s and 60s. And so before that, a lot of fragile things ended up having to be shipped in boxes. So this is the lid of a box in Nyasaland that was sent to London carrying something either fragile or heavy. The 1 pound stamp paid the rate for this item, which was rather heavy. This is the only lid from a box I've ever seen, despite the fact that there had been millions and millions of boxes that were shipped in the late 1800s and early 1900s before corrugated cardboard. Now, every page I've just shown you for various reasons, and notice before I moved on, this lid was thick. So I had to take it to a craftsman and have him thin the lid for me so I could fit it on a page that would go into a frame. But the lid's still so thick, I couldn't mount it with any ordinary measure, and I didn't want to put any gummy adhesive on the lid itself, attaching it permanently to the page. So I used a plastic sleeve, and I cut it down and folded it under in order to get it on the page. So all the pages I've just shown you were in my World Stamp Championship exhibit in London. There's a lot more, obviously, but they weren't willing to give me, 4 hours to present my whole exhibit. So that's the end of that. But I also wanted to show you my collection is quite extensive. I've been doing this for almost 50 years. And so I've acquired a lot of interesting pieces. So some of the pages following, I'm showing you that you don't always need to show everything you think is important in your collection. This was one of the items that didn't make the final cut, even though it's very important because this is the largest block known of Spain's second stamp on cover. And it's very appealing visually. But then I also included a smaller wrapper, which is the first day of issue of that stamp. And so I have a first day and the largest block, and both of these stamps have the date and the stamp's design, because Spain would give a limited period of use for all of its stamps in the early period, thinking this would fight counterfeiting. It turned out it really didn't fight counterfeiting at all. But Spain was one of the few countries that wanted to put dates on all their stamps and then invalidate them after the last day of the year. So these are two examples. I didn't want to put the large block on a page by itself. So I included the other one, but I think it enhances the image. Here are some more items that I wanted to show: choosing routes for speed. The one on the bottom going to Madras went over the Mont Cenis route in order to go faster through Brindisi. The one on top is when the various British North America colonies would send mail through the United States through to New York in order to get to London faster. And so there was a 5-cent rate at this time to go via New York, because that's what the Canadian Post Office would end up paying for this service before they ended up having a mutual exchange of domestic rates. Here are some postal cards. You've often probably wondered why a postal card would say on the front, this side for the address, the reverse for the message. Well, this is the bottom card here shows where the sender squeezed a message onto the address side of the card, not knowing he was only supposed to use the back of the card. And so this is a scan of the back of the card, but this is the message that this German speaker living in Guatemala squeezed onto the front with the address. Here is a card that is used when you look at the manuscript date. It's used months before it was supposed to have been issued. So we probably have the date wrong. Here are some, again, no direct postal relations. British Columbia would send mail through the United States. And typically, this one's going to San Francisco, so they had to pay US postage. There was the carrier fee for Wells Fargo, which is indicated by this mark. And then you had to pay the processing postage to the post office in British Columbia. This one goes from Brazil through Buenos Aires to Chile. The Brazilians did not have an agreement on the exchange of mail with Chile because it was so much easier to just use Argentina as the conduit. And so a ship captain carried this to Buenos Aires and put an Argentine stamp on it. And that way it got, it was considered prepaid when it got into Chile. Here's some other postal relations with non-members. So we have Victoria to the UK with surcharge. They had lowered the rate. Here we have Portugal to Brazil before Brazil became a member, but Portugal extended a special rate to Brazil. And then one of the beauties about the Portuguese arrangement with Brazil is just for the added value of 80 reais, they could send mail to Argentina, and it was considered prepaid when it got to Argentina. And so that is few of the highlights of things that I thought would be important for anybody exhibiting postal history. I tried to share techniques for how I deal with challenges. And again, I'm always looking at the viewpoint that my judges and my viewers will not know my field. So I have to explain a lot more than I normally would, but I've really reduced it. And I try to keep the space around the objects as wide as possible, and I try to segment the information. So if you're walking along the exhibit and you're going, well, why is this so important? You can read about the individual item, but if you kind of understand it from one of the top paragraphs, like this one, then, you know, there's no reason to get into detail unless you have a personal interest. And this appeals to the viewers generally and to the judges, because again, judges are looking for visual impact, and they're looking to see if the treatment flows so that it makes sense. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Sandeep, for questions.
Jamie, thank you for a fabulous presentation and for these gorgeous, gorgeous slides that we all got to see. Just eye candy everywhere. With that, let's start with the questions. The first question I have here is from Francis Ambrose. Francis writes, this presentation is about postal history. Why in the texture chapter you mention proofs and essays and so on?
Well, the theme the theme of my exhibit is about the Universal Postal Union, and they had rules pertaining to the issuance of stamps. So under the rules, regulations, and rates of the UPU, stamps are a germane part of the story. And this exhibit has won 3 international Grand Prix. So obviously the jury didn't have a problem with my logic.
Thank you.
You should not
Sorry.
be taught to the concept of rates, routes, and hand stamps. We all use that. It's become part of the vernacular. But I needed to explain UPU rules, and it includes the actual issuance and use of stamps in certain instances. Not all. I would not be able to randomly select a stamp and put it into the exhibit.
Great. Thank you. The next question is from Arnya Datta Chaudhary. Are stamps and proofs of stamps allowed in postal history exhibits? Sort of.
Yes, if you pull out the regulations and read it carefully, it says stamps, proofs, and unused postal stationery are ordinarily not included. But if you have a good rationale for it, it's acceptable.
So the second part of Arnya's question is, do FTCs in postal history need to have gone through the mail? Can you use FTCs, first day covers, that is?
I won't give 100% no, but I'm leaning that way 99%. Again, it would depend on your theme, your storyline, and whether or not including a philatelic first day makes sense within the context of what you're dealing with. But you run a very high risk of pissing off 1 or 2 judges because they might disagree with your argument.
Right. Great.
99% of the time, no.
The next question is from Dinesh Chandra Sharma. Dinesh writes, well, there was a slide where you showed a stamp on a wrapper and you said it's the only known stamp on a wrapper, and he wants to know how do you get that information? How to know that the wrapper is only known?
Well, I network a lot with country specialists, and when I showed that item to a number of high-level experts of Philippines, they were blown away because they didn't know it existed. So I said, "You mean you've never seen this before?" And they go, "No." And so, you know, you take a sample of any country's top 3 to 5 leading philatelists, and they've never seen it, chances are good that it's probably the only one. But in most descriptions, when I talk about an item, I hedge my statement by saying it is thought. Because like when Mr. Stone, who was a specialist in France, said he had never seen the 15 centime tax stamp on blue paper on anything. He wrote that in an article, and he was at that point like 40 years into collecting. And I found my first one in an estate in Spain and it had been in this family collection for over 100 years. I sent him a copy and he was blown away by it. And he said, well, this is the only one. And then a second one appeared from a collection in Portugal. So I would say now that there are two, because I now have confirmation from two different collections that one used to own it and the other also sold it, but I didn't need a second one. And by the way, I need to mention, don't pad your exhibit. If you think that there are only two out there, you're offered the second one, don't buy it unless it's a better example than the one you have. And then when you get the better example, get rid of the one you have. People who think that there's great prestige in having all the known examples, that doesn't work very well anymore. And I'll give you an example. There was a very high level exhibit of a British colony, and the exhibitor on one page showed 4 blocks, and he said, these are the only known blocks of 4 of this stamp. And then the exhibit next to him had a block of 6. So how important is it having all 4 blocks of 4? And my feeling as a judge was it wasn't important at all. And I was actually not impressed with the fact that this guy was depriving other collectors of the prestige and the joy of owning one of the blocks. He didn't need all 4, and they all looked identical.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to move on to the very last question, and that is from Ashok Rana. Ashok asked, are illustrations of postmarks and route maps allowed?
Yes. It would depend on the exhibit, and I wouldn't overdo it. Not every page should have one of those, is my general opinion, because it kind of makes your exhibit look like it has the measles. And, you know, if you can standardize your mapping in such a way that it's unobtrusive to the page, that's great. But sometimes, and I'm talking competitively, you can do anything you want with your exhibit. Just don't get upset if you are not a contender for Grand Prix. And I think exhibits that tend to have maps on every page are never contenders. It's just something I've never seen.
Right. With that, Jamie, thank you very much. And I'm going to turn it over to Pratisad. Pratisad, you're muted. Can you unmute?
Thanks, Jamie, for your wonderful and informative presentation. We really loved it. Thanks a lot. And this is a small token of appreciation from Philatelic Congress of India, a certificate of appreciation from our side.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.